Uh, I live in the state of Colorado. Our town is called Manitou Springs. It's a tiny little sort of a throwback to the 1960s community that is tucked in right at the foot of the mountain called Pikes Peak. And it's a wonderful place to live. We have lots of parks around here for running, trails, biking, all kinds of things. It's really a fun place to live. And I've gotten used to doing a running route through the Garden of the Gods, which is one of America's most famous parks. It's an extraordinary thing if you ever get a chance to come and visit. It's sandstone formations that are plates in the earth, just this shifted straight upward and rise in many cases more than 100 meters in the air. The It's a beautiful place to run, and during the winter time, very few tourists. So it's always a little bit difficult to come to this time of the year when people come back to the park and there's a lot of traffic. I noticed in one May, a couple of years ago, that I was running up into the park and all of a sudden realized the road was blocked off with barricades. And there was a police officer in a car sitting there enforcing the barricades. And I was thinking, why are they blocking off my park? I have been running here all winter long. This belongs to me. And so I went up to the police officer and said, I assume that it's okay for runners to go on through. He said, oh, yes, that's fine. Just don't get in the way of the race. I barely heard what he was saying. I had my earbuds in with music. And so I just continued on down the road, went up a hill, down a hill, up a hill, down a hill, up a third hill. Down the third hill, there were 500 runners coming directly toward me. And I quickly realized I was okay because there were orange cones placed in the middle of the road. All of the runners were on that side, and I was on the other side. Still, it was uncomfortable running past them because they're all going this way, and I'm the one guy going this way. And they were all staring at me as if to ask, how on earth, why are you on the other side of the road? Why are you going the opposite direction of everyone else? I felt a little bit self-conscious about it. But then I all of a sudden realized in the race they were a part of, they were all running this direction to a turnaround point and then coming back the direction that I was going. In their minds, I was winning, and they could not see how a guy my age could possibly be winning the race by that much. I often tell that story to my students because I want them to understand that sometimes when you think that you're going the opposite direction of everyone else, it may be the case that you know something that they don't yet know. Now, sometimes you're just going the wrong direction. But the students I work with find it very difficult to be that one person who stands alone. And so much of the work we do at Summit Ministries is encouraging them to be the one who's willing to say something, willing to stand, willing to speak the truth, even if no one else is willing to do it. But that is very difficult, and it's becoming increasingly difficult. Oh, there's a picture of the race, by the way. The runner that you see on the left-hand side of your screen is the one who passed me. He was the actual winner of the race. I still don't know what race I was in. But look at these statistics of this is how we're seeing this in the States. Between 30 and 50% of young adults who claim to be born again Christians as college freshmen claim to not be born again Christians when they graduate from the university. 75% of students who were significantly involved in church in high school are no longer even attending church as 20-somethings. And we've also learned that those who don't attend college or university after high school are even more likely than those who do attend the college or university to stop attending church. So it's not just that they're facing pressures in their university that are somehow setting their faith aside. There is something about the nature of the culture that mitigates against their living out their faith. On the other hand, we found at Summit Ministries that if we can get students into one of our training programs, most of them are 2 weeks long. A number of our courses are study courses that they would take maybe as part of a Christian day school. But we have found that whereas the average um, American or the average Christian is going to not have a biblical worldview in questions like moral truth is absolute, the Bible is accurate, and so forth, that the Summit graduates, the ones in gray on the screen there, have a very high answer to all of those questions. That they understand something more about what it means to have and to live out a biblical worldview than virtually all of their peers. So, what what's behind all of that? One of our instructors at Summit Ministries in our programs is a very well respected professor named Stephen Garber. Stephen Garber has pointed out, in fact, he asked an interesting question. He didn't ask the question in his research, why do 75% of young people leave the church? He asked the question, why do 25% of them stay? What characterizes the 25% that doesn't characterize the 75%? I thought that was a fascinating question. And he said there are essentially three things. First, they develop strong convictions based on a biblical worldview that addresses real world challenges. Second, they have caring mentors who demonstrate that it is possible to successfully live out a biblical worldview. And then third, they're involved in a vibrant community of people who share their values and life experiences and commit to living godly lives. Those three things will be the 3 points that I'd like to focus on in the time that I've got with you today. That strong convictions, caring mentors, and vibrant community. When I say they have strong convictions based on a biblical worldview, and that helps them stay strong in their faith, at least as measured by church involvement, what I'm saying is that they understand something about the patterns of ideas that rule the world and recognize how Christianity is actually part of that conversation. So at Summit Ministries, we have 3 different textbooks that we've developed that students can take to the university with them. One is on apologetics. What is the Bible? How does the Bible work? What's the Bible's story? How do we know the Bible is true? The second one is the different worldviews that are competing with one another. And then the third book is on, if a Christian worldview is true, what does that look like for the big issues that students today care about, like justice, poverty care, creation care, the use of force, and so forth? So we define a worldview as a pattern of ideas, of beliefs, of convictions, and habits that help us make sense of God, the world, and our relationship to God and the world. Our students find out when they come to one of our programs right away that no one gets to be neutral when it comes to the ideas that rule the world. I grew up thinking that, well, if you didn't have any belief in God, then you are at neutral. If you have a belief in God, then you must defend that because that's counterintuitive. I realized that's not so. In fact, if you look at the dictionary definition of religion, it says that a religion is any set of beliefs about the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe. An atheist is religious. An atheist has a set of beliefs about the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe just as much as a Christian does. A number of years ago, I was on a television program and pointed this out, and it literally left the other guest and the host of the program speechless. They had literally never considered the possibility that everybody has a worldview, not just people who are making Christian claims based on the Bible. So that key term is pattern. Worldview is a pattern of ideas, and ideas of thought or conception about the way things are. A belief is an idea that we hold to be true. A conviction is a belief that we are willing to sacrifice for. And then a habit is how we live out the beliefs that we hold to be true. First Chronicles 12:32 is the theme verse behind this book, Understanding the Times, that I referenced. It's just a reference to the tribe of Issachar, men who had understanding of the times, according to First Chronicles 12:32, to know what Israel ought to do, 200 chiefs and all their kinsmen under their command. It falls in a passage of all of the individuals, all of the tribes of Israel coming to David's side as he prepared to become king, and their troop strength. Issachar alone is mentioned without the troop strength. And we know how many troops they had. It's listed other places in scripture. But there, it was more important that they had leaders than that they had a large concentration of troops. It's just one of those interesting things in scripture where you realize that sometimes having people who understand the times, who are willing to lead, is more important than having massive numbers. So that's kind of been a theme for us. But let me share what I mean by patterns. Every successful endeavor that makes impossible things possible does so because of patterns. Here's a picture of a tennis player named Andy Roddick. He was for many years a professional tennis player, and he was known as having the most powerful serve of any professional tennis player. He could serve the tennis ball at 156 miles an hour, uh, which is so extraordinarily fast in such a short space. I had a friend who played Andy against Andy Roddick, and I asked him what is it like? He said his serve is unbelievably overpowering. He said it comes at you so fast that if you don't have a sense of where it's going to go, you'll never come close to touching it. And yet people return his serves all of the time. In fact, to complicate things, the University of California at Los Angeles did a study and they found that the average stroke in a tennis match at the professional level, not just the serve, but any stroke, the ball is moving so fast that the only way to return it is to hit the ball back before your brain realizes it has arrived. And you say, now that's not actually physiologically possible. And that's what the UCLA researchers were pointing out. It's not physiologically possible, and yet it happens all day, every day, in every single professional tennis match. How is it possible? So I asked this friend of mine who had played professional tennis, and he said, when you get to the place where you're playing at a professional level, you probably have had well over 10,000 hours of intensive practice in matches. And with that amount of practice, you learn to see things that other people don't see. Very slight adjustments in the ball toss, or things that you know about that person's strategy in past matches. All of those pieces of information come together and give you a sense of the patterns that enable you to succeed at something that is actually physiologically impossible. Same thing would be true in chess. It used to be thought that grandmaster chess players had a photographic memory, but it turns out they just have a high level of pattern recognition. They discovered this by they would show these chess players a partially played chess game and then have them turn around after 2 seconds and write down the position of as many pieces on the board that they could remember. And they could unerringly remember the position of every single piece on the board. So they thought, well, they must just sort of take a photograph in their mind and they remember it. But then the researchers played a trick on them. They said, let's try to put the pieces on the board in a way that they would never appear in an actual game. And then they had the grandmaster chess players try to memorize that. Come to find out they couldn't do it. Their memory level was just as poor as the non-chess players who were given the same task as the control group. In other words, these chess players weren't memorizing the position of the places on the board, the pieces on the board. They were looking for the patterns of play that would emerge had particular chess strategies been employed that got the pieces to that place on the board. Does that make sense so far? Patterns make possible things that are impossible. And at Summit Ministries, we teach our students the same thing is true in the world of ideas. The Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians 10:5, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to the obedience of Christ. Well, if you've been to any sizable library, you know how impossible that is. How are you going to go to the Bodleian Library at Oxford University with its 5 million volumes and take captive every thought to the obedience of Christ? The only way you could possibly do it is by understanding the patterns that ideas flow in. So I'm showing you a chart here, and I don't know what kind of a device you have that you're looking at this. It's an awful lot of information, but if you are interested in seeing it in more detail, you can use a search engine and just type in Summit Ministries worldview chart, and you'll be able to see maybe hopefully a clearer copy of this. But at Summit Ministries, we share with our students that in the West, there are 6 dominant worldviews. Christianity is significantly influential. Islam is significantly influential. But secularism, the idea that religious belief is the source of society's problems and should be eliminated from discussion, that's a dominant view. Marxism is a dominant view as well. The idea that we live in an entirely material world, that there is no God, no Jesus, no Holy Spirit, no heaven, no hell, and that because we live in a material world and our natural resources are all that actually exist, if any one person has more than anyone else, it's because they've stolen it. And you must incite conflict to move society to where it needs to be. That's a dominant worldview as well. New spirituality, some people call New Age, kind of a Western manifestation of Eastern ideology. Postmodernism, we show our students, is a significant thought pattern as well, which is essentially skepticism to the idea that any ultimate truth can be known or expressed. So, are there other viewpoints? There certainly are. There could be hundreds of different patterns of ideas. We aren't trying to get our students to understand everything. We're trying to get them to understand the basic flow of ideas taking place on their university campuses. Then we look at those 6 different worldviews in 10 areas: theology, philosophy, down the left-hand side, ethics, biology, psychology, sociology, law, politics, economics, and history. So I'll give you a quick example of this. I did my doctoral work at the University of Denver. Um, they had, it was a really great experience. I loved being part of it, but I was always trying to figure out the ideas that were being expressed. Well, I took one class called Psychology of the Spoken Language. Psychology of the Spoken Language. So if you look down the left-hand side, you can see psychology is one of the categories. Then I went to the bookstore to pick up the textbook, and it was written by a researcher named L.S. Vygotsky. Okay, Vygotsky. That sounds Russian. I wonder what his worldview is. So I looked in the introduction to the textbook. L.S. Vygotsky was a student of Ivan Pavlov, who was the Marxist behaviorist. So I knew something about his worldview. When I went to class, I asked the professor, could you tell us a little about the author of our textbook, L.S. Vygotsky? He gave a brief biography. And I said, I understand that L.S. Vygotsky was a student of Ivan Pavlov. He said, interesting point. That is correct. And why do you bring that up? I said, well, because Ivan Pavlov is now regarded suspiciously by historians for having used his psychological research primarily to curry favor with the communist leaders of the Soviet Union. And I'm just curious what parts of his philosophy you think L.S. Vygotsky embraced and what parts he rejected. So I was able to inject a discussion about worldview issues immediately in the class without having to do anything other than ask questions. My classmates were staring at me at this point as if to say, are we supposed to already know this? They should have. It was all in the introduction to the textbook. It's not like anything was hidden here about what worldview was at play, but they just hadn't bothered to really look into it. So having a chart like this does not cover all of the worldviews, but it does cover a significant number of key issues that we know students are going to be facing to help them orient themselves to the ideas that are prominent in their classroom. So I hope that makes sense. I know we'll have a question and answer time here in a few minutes, but what our students are looking for at Summit Ministries and what we try to provide them is what we call the water cooler test. If we talk about something, say the reliability of scripture, for instance, are we communicating about it clearly enough and giving them an opportunity to get their questions answered and role play how to have this conversation with someone else so that if they went to work and stood around the water cooler at break time and the topic came up, that they would feel confident to know what to say and how to say it? That's what we're looking for with our students. And that's what we mean by saying having strong convictions based on a biblical worldview. The second key point that I wanted to make is carrying mentors who show young people and demonstrate how to live out a Christian worldview. So at Summit Ministries, no matter who you talk to on our staff, if you ask them, what is your job? They will draw a little DNA double helix and say there are two strands, truth and relationship. And my job, they will tell you, is to put the connecting nucleotides between truth and relationship for somebody every day. That truth without relationship can make people arrogant, makes them feel like they're know-it-alls. Relationship without truth causes people to be apathetic because they're saying, oh, it doesn't really matter what we believe. Let's just get along. Let's just talk about something else. The young adults who stay significantly involved in church are the ones who have mentors who connect truth and relationship for them every day. Let me give you a quick piece of research on this. George Barna, in his research on the millennial generation, was able to show that 20 somethings who remained active in their faith beyond high school, that those who stay were twice as likely to have a close personal friendship with an adult inside the church. Those who had an intentional mentor at church were 2.5 times as likely to stay active as those who did not. So, what is it that young adults are walking away from when we say they're walking away from church? Primarily, what they're walking away from is a belief that nobody there really knows or cares about them or is bothering to incorporate them into the life of the church. When they have those friendships, they have those mentors who say, what we're doing here is important. You're a significant part of it. This applies to everything. What is your job? Oh, you're an attorney. Hey, let me connect you with this other attorney in our church and see if you guys can compare notes about how to live out a Christian worldview as an attorney. That kind of thing happening is what keeps young adults engaged. One of the ways we do this at Summit Ministries to keep young adults engaged is just to focus on asking questions. You know, our initial posture in any given conversation at Summit with our graduates is to listen, because we believe that conversations about our faith, conversations about a biblical worldview, conversations about difficult topics in culture, these are long-term conversations. Very seldom will we get to wrap them up in just one brief encounter. So we're teaching our students to lead with questions. I will have students who will tell me, oh, yes, I went off to the university and my professor made it clear from the start of class that anything other than an atheist worldview would be viewed with suspicion. Okay, what do you do in that situation? Well, most students who haven't been trained are just going to remain quiet. Obviously, they want to pass the class, they want to get their degree. Our students learn instead to just start asking questions. Questions like, do you think that's the whole story? So I had a professor once who actually said in class, let me summarize for you the whole of Judeo Christian history. He said, God is a mean bully. So I just raised my hand. Do you think that's the whole story? Well, what do you mean? I said, well, you just summarized 4,000 years of history in one sentence. Do you think that's the whole story? He said, well, of course not. I'm just exaggerating to make a point. Well, I looked at my classmates and realized they didn't find what the professor had done humorous at all. They actually looked at the professor and said, this Myers guy, the Christian in the class, is more open minded than my professor. That led to a lot of opportunities to have significant discussions later on, all starting with one question. What do you mean by that? A lot of our students today are concerned with issues like transgender. It's important to ask, what do you mean by transgender? My students will usually say, well, gender and sex are different things. Well, how did you arrive at that conclusion? How do you know that is true? I know people say that all the time, but what is the basis for it? We're trying to get our students to be more thoughtful and to open up conversations rather than to close them down, which unfortunately is the impulse on a lot of university campuses. How do you know that what you believe is true? And then even a question like, what happens if you are wrong? Most people don't like to think of the possibility that they might be wrong. And I don't even necessarily, if I think somebody's wrong, I don't need them to admit it. I just need to ask a question that will keep on asking long after the conversation is over. So, good mentors ask a lot of questions, lead with questions, and leave young adults thinking. The third point, and I'm aware of the time because I want to be sure we have plenty of time for questions and at the end, is a vibrant community that helps young adults consistently live with an authentic Christian worldview. Most of the young adults I'm working with, Gen Zs, what we call them here in the States, they don't like being alone. They don't like thinking of themselves as being alone. They want to have strength in numbers. And that at root is a good impulse. I want them to know that they're part of a community of thoughtful people who are addressing big issues and not shying away from them. Yes, there are giants in the land, but we don't lose hope. We continue to stand for the truth. But it's always going to be easier if there's a community of people. You know, one of our professors at Summit Ministries who teaches apologetics and philosophy is J.P. Moreland. He's widely regarded as one of the top philosophers in the world. When our students go off to a philosophy class at their university and find that their professor is a non believer, they don't have to be able to know everything of what to say and do in that class. Sometimes it's just helpful to know. Oh, at Summit Ministries, my professor was J.P. Moreland. He's one of the smartest philosophers in the world. I don't necessarily have to believe everything that my professor says from the podium. So this is the focus of what we are doing at Summit Ministries with our students. This is the antique hotel where we have our programs for them. And when students come to participate in this program, they are learning how to engage from the standpoint of a vibrant community, asking all of their difficult questions, finding good books and resources, and then being much better prepared than they were before to go off to the university. Some of our students are doing, really exciting things. We had one student who came to Summit Ministries and she took on a very significant understanding of the value of human life. And she said, our abortion policies, and she was in this Midwestern state of South Dakota. Our policies are not friendly to life. So she asked the two major political parties, the Democrat and the Republican, the candidates in the race for a state representative seat, do you have a pro-life conviction? And one of them said, oh, I'm personally pro-life, but I wouldn't impose my morality on anyone else. The other one said, no, I'm pro-abortion. I'm for a woman's right to choose. And Jenna said, well, I I'm not comfortable with either one of those answers. So she went down, filed the paperwork, and at 21 years of age ran for the state representative seat and beat both of the other candidates for that seat. Um, it's a fun story because of the way it turns out. She went to the state capitol, and of course, she wasn't very well respected because she was taking a pro life stance. Also, she wasn't very well respected because she was just 21. Well, she continued to take a stand, experienced a lot of difficulty. Her father saw the stand that his daughter was taking, and he was so impressed that when the other state representative seat from their city came open, he decided to run for that seat, and he won. So the two representatives, state representatives from the city of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, were father and daughter. Jenna was a single woman living at home at that point. I asked I asked her, "What is that like living at home with your father? You're both state representatives." And she said, "Well, I just continually remind him that I'm the senior legislator from the district." But it was so much fun to watch her say, I can step forward. I can do this. I can make a difference. There's so many other examples I could give. One of our students started an organization called Save the Storks. So they were acting on pro-life convictions as well, but they realized we need to ask the question, why would somebody get an abortion? And they realized several things. First of all, that the vast majority of people who get abortions because they're being pressured to do so by their partner or by their parents. And they don't really want to do it, but they don't have a sense that what they're carrying is a baby. If they go to the clinic to have an abortion, there will be a sonogram taken, but they will not be shown the results. So this group said, let's equip these medical buses with sonograms and park them on the street outside of the abortion clinics and ask people if they want to get a free sonogram. And when they come in and see the picture of their baby, 4 out of 5 of them decide they don't want to get an abortion. And then at that point, they connect them with resources that will carry them with personal care all the way through the 9 months of their pregnancy and into the toddlerhood of the child until they can kind of get back on their feet again. But you see what's happening here is that they're taking the issues that people have talked about and dealt with and that have led to so much division, and they found a way around that. This is really an extraordinary generation. If you want resources that would be helpful to this, and before I open it for questions, I did write a book called Cultivate with two co-authors, Paul and Paige Guttaker. And it's essentially a textbook of how to have conversations with the rising generation. Every single page is here's what the issue is that they're facing. Here's how to ask a question, or here are 5 different ways that you can talk about that. So it's very practical. If that's a resource that would be of interest to you, that's available on our website at summit.org.